In May of 1902, something heavy came smashing through the front window of the Lustgarten family's kosher butcher shop on the Lower East Side of New York City. A protester had. At the turn of the 20th century, the Lower East Side was the most crowded neighborhood anywhere in the world. Many people who lived in the neighborhood were immigrants, and many of those immigrants were Jewish. As Jewish kosher tradition met an American culture obsessed with meat, kosher butcher shops flourished. The Lustgarten family ran one such kosher shop in the basement of 97 Orchard Street, where the Tenement Museum is today. The Lustgarten's butcher shop was one of nearly 30 butcher shops on Orchard Street alone. Then, in May of 1902, the prices went up, by a lot. A trust of kosher meat wholesalers took advantage of the control they had on the market to raise prices by 50%. Retailers like the Lustgartens were angry. They resisted these changes, but after 5 days of arguing with the meat trust, nothing had changed. They saw no alternative but to pass the increased cost onto their customers. So who were their customers? Women. Jewish women. Women who fed families and balanced budgets inside the local tenements alongside husbands and children who were garment workers, pushcart peddlers, house painters. These were not wealthy people. They were outraged at the meat trust and unimpressed with the retailers' weak sauce attempts at resistance. On May 14th, two Lower East Side women, Sarah Edelson and Fanny Levy, gathered together their friends and neighbors to plan action. No woman was to buy kosher meat until prices went down. They didn't call it a boycott. They called it a strike. Because caring for their families was work. It was their work. Starting the morning of May 15th, hundreds of women streamed into the streets of the Lower East Side. They picketed. They spread leaflets. They went door to door in their tenements, pressuring their neighbors to join the cause. The newly formed Ladies' Anti-Beef Trust published a letter in the Yiddish socialist newspaper, the Jewish Daily Forward.
Dear sisters, as we hold fast in our bitter struggle against the beef trust and against the Jewish butchers who are attacking us from all sides, we request that you, in the name of humanity, help us in our battle so that we can win. We began this great struggle out of need. Our sorrows drove us, despite the fact that we Jewish women are in principle calm and quiet. The butchers have raised the prices of meat so high that it is no longer possible for us to eat meat.
And where calm and quiet didn't work, they found other ways to keep the strike going. On Friday, May 16th, women across the city broke into butcher shops and hurled meat into the street. As meat collected in the gutters, women gathered it up, piled it in the middle of the street, doused it with kerosene, and set it on fire. As the days wore on, strikers shouted and shoved at the scabs who crossed picket lines. They snatched wrapped chickens out of the arms of customers as they tried to flee back to their homes. They barged into kitchens and bakeries to pluck beef out of cholent pots. The police arrived to break things up. Protesters resisted arrest on the streets, while above them, supporters of the strike threw odds and ends at the officers from the windows of their tenement homes. All told, 85 people were arrested, 70 of them Jewish women. The New York Times published an editorial condemning the protesters.
These rioters were plainly desperate. They meant to defy the police and were ready for severe treatment. They did not get treatment nearly severe enough, and they are therefore far more dangerous than they were before.
The boycott was a success, but a limited one. By the time protests ended on June 5th, prices had dropped to 14 cents per pound of kosher meat. But they would rise again. As the movement gained success, men in the community increasingly attempted to take control and credit away from the women who had organized it. The strike ended, and the uprising women returned to their previous lives. But they too would rise again. 7 years later, in 1909, a 23-year-old labor organizer named Clara Lemlich stood in front of a crowd of shirtwaist workers in New York City and called for a general strike. The next day, 20,000 shirtwaist workers walked out of their jobs to join her. They were mostly young women from immigrant families living in tenement neighborhoods like the Lower East Side. Most of them were too young to have participated in the kosher meat strike of 1902. But maybe they remembered it. Maybe they remembered watching another immigrant woman stand in front of a crowd and call for a strike, insisting that she would not give her last cents to the butcher and watch her children go barefoot. Maybe they remembered what the crowd of women shouted back that time. We will not be silent. We will overturn the world.